The film opens in a fog-bound, almost timeless English manor on the island of Jersey during the aftermath of World War II. Nicole Kidman's Grace Stewart awakens in the dead of night from a nightmare. The camera lingers on the house's heavy curtains, the dim lamps, and the strict rules she enforces. All windows must be shuttered, the curtains drawn, and the lights kept low because her two children, Anne and Nicholas, suffer from a rare photosensitivity that makes daylight effectively lethal. This condition defines the film's atmosphere. Perpetual dusk, a household running on ritual and fear, and it sets up Grace as both a devoted mother and an anxious, controlling presence who will do anything to shield her family from the sun. From the very first scenes, director Alejandro Amenábar stages the house like a living organism, with creaks, drafts, and long, empty corridors that breathe tension into every frame. Grace's relationship with her children is complicated and central. And the older child is imaginative, willful, and prone to telling stories that the adults find unnerving. Nicholas is quieter, a boy who follows rules and often recites what he thinks will comfort his mother. Their dynamic is tender but strained, and tests boundaries, accusing Grace of hiding things. Grace responds with stern discipline because she believes strictness keeps them alive. The film invests heavily in the texture of domestic routine, the rituals of covering glass with cloth and placing lamps just so, making the intrusion of the uncanny all the more disruptive. These rituals also hint at Grace's claustrophobic need for control in a world where she has little power. The war rages beyond the estate, and she clings to order inside as a fragile shield against chaos. Into this closed world come the new servants, Mrs. Mills, the prim and strangely calm housekeeper, Mr. Tuttle, who mumbles and shuffles about, and Lydia, a mute and unsettlingly observant girl who is initially presented as a hired hand but later raises more questions. The arrival of these three breaks the monotony of Grace's ordered life, and Amenábar uses their presence to introduce subtle dissonances. Mrs. Mills is courteous but oddly insistent on access to certain rooms. Mr. Tuttle seems to move with secret intention. Lydia's silence and eerie stare make the children nervous. Instead of immediately being helper figures, they become agents of disquiet. Grace's reluctance and suspicion of them, and of any outside presence, grows, because in her mind the world outside is precisely where danger originates. The slow build of weirdness begins with small, domestic disturbances. Curtains go missing despite being carefully tied and stacked. The piano plays faintly in an empty room. And reports seeing a boy named Victor wandering the upstairs corridor. Nicholas corroborates by mentioning that he hears footsteps in the attic at night. These early incidents are filmed with restraint, no jump-scare theatrics, but the cumulative effect is chilling. Amenábar emphasizes silence. The house's quiet becomes a character, and the camera favors long takes that let us hear the faintest creaks and the softest breathing. Grace's growing fear, and the way that fear hardens into a need to control and punish, becomes almost the film's moral axis. Grace's policing of the household intensifies when she begins finding small objects moved and notes left that she cannot explain. She forbids the children from going into certain rooms and insists on labeling everything with names and purposes. Anne, whose imagination already sets her at odds with reason, escalates the tension by organizing seances with imaginary playmates, and by prowling the house in secret. She draws eerie sketches of inhuman figures and describes encounters with people who live in the house. The script is careful not to let the audience accept Anne's accounts as mere childish fantasy. Rather, the film places us in a zone of epistemic uncertainty. Is Anne inventing horrors to gain attention, or is she accurately reporting phenomena that Grace refuses to accept? Grace's belief system is shaken further when she ventures outside for the first time in the fog and encounters a figure she insists is her missing husband, Charles. He is pale, fragile, and disturbingly vague about where he has been. In a town that has seen the horrors of war and loss, Charles's return could be miraculous, yet his presence has an uncanny quality. He appears disoriented, hints at memories that don't line up, and quickly fades into absence. His brief appearances inject the plot with the question of whether those who appear to be alive are truly so. Charles's interactions with Grace oscillate between tender and unnerving. Grace, starved for connection, grabs onto him, but the encounter deepens rather than resolves the unease, If he has returned, why can't he explain himself? If he is not real, what is he? The tension crescendos when Grace begins to hear voices and sees more compelling evidence of other presences. The servant's behavior becomes more odd. Mrs. Mills seems to know things before she should, Mr. Tuttle's habits feel ritualized, and Lydia's silence becomes downright menacing. The film introduces a motif of mistaken assumptions. Grace assumes the house's strange tenants are intruders, but the audience is steered to wonder who truly belongs in the house. Amenábar plays an audacious game. He constructs the narrative so that the viewer oscillates between siding with Grace and doubting her. Her relentless insistence on rules and her willingness to punish the children. In one scene, she locks Anne in a small room for disobedience, makes her less sympathetic even as we fear for the family's safety. A crucial turning point arrives with the appearance of the medium and the seance. Anne, pushed to the edge by curiosity and terror, places a chair and listens as the otherworldly activity becomes undeniable. The seance is filmed with a sickly, suffocating intimacy. Hands clasp, a table trembles, and barely audible voices seem to answer. The others, Grace and her children, have been fearing are called, and the revelation comes crashing in. The people who are intruding are not spirits in the sense Grace imagined. They are the living inhabitants of the house who do not know they are intruding. The seance confirms an inverted reality. The camera's perspective shifts, and the audience receives the famous twist: Grace and her household are the ones who are dead. When the truth is made explicit, the film does not deliver it as a mere trick. Instead, Amenábar carefully unspools the moral and psychological implications. The revealed past, that Grace, in a grief-induced psychosis, smothered her children and then killed herself, reframes every prior scene. The windows forever shuttered, the obsession with protocols, the rituals intended to keep the children alive, all of these become poignant signs of dissociation and denial. Grace's reality collapses. Once the characters realize their true state, their actions take on a tragic patina. The furniture arranged and the names written on doors were not just eccentricities but desperate attempts to hold on to a life that had been lost. Even after the reveal, the film continues to probe the moral consequences. Grace must face what she has done not by accepting punishment in any conventional sense, but by recognizing that she and her family cannot simply integrate with the living world. The living family that called the seance are terrified and flee the house, making it clear that the social order cannot contain both life and death in the same domestic space. The servants, too, are complicated, at first presented as helpful. Their status as dead beings tied to the house complicates our sympathy. Mrs. Mills, in particular, embodies a stoic acceptance of the house's rules, and once the truth is known, her calmness is read as the weary resignation of someone bound to a place by obligation, not malice. The final sequences are almost unbearably sad. Grace's last moments are not cinematic reckoning with external forces but an internal, quiet facing of truth. She realizes that her fierce protection was a form of cruelty that ultimately killed what she wanted to save. And, the child of imagination and life, must confront the reality that her games had been both an attempt to speak truth and a refuge from it. The film's final image, the house continuing to hold them, the living outside shunning it, suggests an eternal entrapment, a family frozen in a loop of memory and regret. This is a horror that does not end in catharsis. It ends in the hard knowledge that certain acts have consequences that transcend ordinary redemption. Amenábar's craft elevates the story beyond a simple ghost tale. Cinematography by Javier Aguirre bathes rooms in muted, almost sepulchral light. The film's palette of grays and pale blues enforces the theme of liminality. The sound design, distant thunder, floorboard creaks, a piano's faint tone, is used to devastating effect. Silence is weaponized and made heavy. Nicole Kidman's performance, restrained yet simmering, gives Grace a tragic dignity even when her choices are monstrous. The supporting cast, especially Fionnuala Flanagan as Mrs. Mills and Alejandro Amenábar as Anne, add texture, helping the film maintain emotional plausibility even as it staggers into its metaphysical territory. Beyond plot and craft, The Others is thematically dense. It interrogates grief, religious belief, maternal identity, and the human need to impose order on chaos. Grace's rituals are almost liturgical. Her faith, conventional, strict, and punitive, collides with the irrationality of the uncanny. The film asks whether belief can be a cure or a delusion. It also probes the ethics of memory. How does one remember actions that cannot be faced? Grace's refusal to accept reality is a mirror for how communities sometimes close their eyes to moral horror to maintain social order. In that way, the haunted house becomes an allegory for collective denial. Different viewers come away from the others with different readings. Some see it strictly as a ghost story with a clever twist. Others read it as a study of trauma and the mind's defense mechanisms. There are interpretations that emphasize the post-war context. The film's persistent fog and the children's pallor suggest a world where death has been normalized by loss. The original release's timing, at the turn of the millennium, gave it extra resonance as audiences were primed to question reality and history. Whatever the lens, Amenábar's film rewards close attention, small props and repeated motifs. The corridor, the covered glass, the piano, accumulate meaning. In the end, The Others does not offer revenge or spectacle. Instead, it invites a melancholy reflection. Its terror comes from recognition, from seeing how love, fear, and grief can warp moral judgment. It is, finally, a story about what we do to preserve our illusions and how those illusions, when they break, strip us of everything we claim to protect. The house on the Jersey Shore remains, in memory, as a place where the living and dead touch and yet cannot reconcile, where a mother's greatest devotion becomes the cause of her family's ruin.